UNCLOS का रिफॉर्म एजेंडा क्या है? What is the reform agenda? Now, just know this, that by and large, the first point, by and large, okay, UNCLOS is considered to be very successful. Okay, UNCLOS is considered to be very, very successful. In fact, it's considered as one of the best examples of positive diplomacy. The best examples of collaborative diplomacy, where there is mutual win-win propositions for all countries. Best example of positive diplomacy, best example of collaborative diplomacy, an example of a win-win proposition for all member nations. Again, understand, UNCLOS was being developed, okay, since 1950s, 50s से 80 तक, and this was the years of the heightened Cold War. उस Cold War के time में we could think of this and ultimately get countries sign it. Okay, this is a great success. So एक unanimous agreement है, okay, that UNCLOS is something like the constitution of the oceans. It's like a constitution of the oceans. This is accepted. So the good words here, accepted. Now, main dispute jo hai, there are 4 main disputes, okay, or 4 main disagreements. One is the EEZ, okay, the rights and the management of the EEZ waters. The rights and the management of the EEZ waters. Okay. EEZ कहां से कहां तक है? Anybody? EEZ कहां से कहां तक है? Okay. Now this is a major mistake. अब सुनो, सब चीज प्रीलिम से फंसते हो आप लोग. हाँ, so listen to this. अगर ये country है, okay, and this is the baseline, तो EZ कहां तक है? Okay, now listen. EZ का जो लिमिट है 200 nautical miles तक from the baseline, but the EEZ actually is after the contiguous zone. टेरिटोरियल वाटर्स को और कंटिगुअस जोन को EEZ नहीं बोलते हैं. EEZ का लिमिट मार्क करने के लिए फ्रॉम द बेसलाइन है. इज इट ओके ऑल ऑफ यू? द बेसलाइन, ओके, से 200 नॉटिकल माइल्स, दैट्स इक्वल टू 370 किलोमीटर्स तक. दिस इज द EEZ. बट द टेरिटोरियल वाटर्स एंड द कंटिगुअस वाटर्स, these are not considered as the EEZ. The EEZ actually is from the seaward limit of the contiguous zone. From the seaward limit of contiguous zone up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline. From the seaward limit of the contiguous zone up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline. ठीक है? Okay. तो इसमें डिस्प्यूट ये है कि नंबर 1, navigation rights in the EEZ. Now UNCLOS says that the EEZ is actually not sovereign waters. It is not sovereign waters. I mean, it does not belong to a country as a sovereign territory, but the waters and resources belong to the country. The EEZ is not sovereign waters, but the resources of EEZ are those of the coastal state. Not sovereign waters का मतलब है the country cannot manage the navigation. They can't stop anybody. So it's open waters for navigation. So countries dispute this aspect. और इस dispute में इंडिया भी है. India does not accept, okay, the EEZ waters as entirely not sovereign for the coastal state. इनका कहना है कि ठीक है आप यूज कर सकते हो, but the coastal states should be informed about it. Not sovereign means anybody can come in. Okay, अभी क्या है? Innocent passage rise, it's only for the territorial waters. India says, no, there should be some type of authorization. India demands some sort of authorization, some type of verification, or some type of verification of all vessels entering into a country's EEZ. और यही dispute था. Remember the arrest of the Italian Marines? Ultimately they were sent back, but with conditions. And last year, I think June, May, the US military USS called as John Paul Jones, it entered into the EEZ of India near Lakshadweep. United Nations ship John Paul Jones entered into the EEZ of India near Lakshadweep, and the US said that it is their right of navigation in the open seas. India has not taken that very kindly. For US it was right of navigation in the open seas. So ये एक dispute है that has to resolve. EEZ also needs to be regulated in some ways. That's one. The second dispute is about extension of the EEZ. The second is the extensions of the EEZ, so that the open waters in some way are part of some global treaty, and not merely under the ISA for mineral exploration, So what we're looking at is World Ocean Treaty. So whatever is happening on the UNCLOS, it's largely around the coastal waters. For open waters, हमारा कोई भी treaty नहीं है. It is proposed है that the world oceans required a World Oceans Treaty. जो अभी नहीं है. So ISA is not competent to deal with disputes, to deal with ownership, and to deal with ownership of the open seas. The second reforms hai. The third is UNCLOS is very inadequate to deal with environmental issues of the oceans, particularly number one, dumping in the open seas, number two, overfishing, number three, oil spills in the open seas, and number four, ocean warming and sea level rise issues. Ocean warming and the sea level rise issues. The next is UNCLOS does not have provisions related to ownership and regulation of the seas because of Arctic and Antarctic melting. कि वो किसका डोमेन होगा? Arctic and Antarctic melting. And for all speculations जो है, the Arctic Ocean will be entirely melt waters by 2050. 2050 तक Arctic Ocean will actually be an ocean, no frozen waters. So what happens for resources there? What happens for the ownership there? The navigation through the Arctic waters. The management, ownership of the Arctic and the Antarctic waters. Like I said, by 2050, The Arctic Ocean will be entirely, okay, melt waters. Will be melt waters. The next issue is, now see, ab batao, does EZ allow for artificial islands or not? Answer is yes, it does. Okay, write down this point. The EZ allows for artificial islands, building of infrastructure for safeguarding and exploration of resources. But the process and procedures for approval of such construction is required. End of the day, these structures in the seas can impact many things. So, abhi wo gray area hai. And that's one issue why South China Sea mein conflicts hain. Okay. So the document actually allows artificial islands. But how to do it, who will give the permission, how to regulate that, those areas are gray areas. Okay, so more or less, definitely not. It is just mentioned you can make the island, but does not tell us to redraw the baseline. That's where the disputes arise. There must be some procedure how to do this. Achha, ek aur point add karo, that the developed nations and the West, have numerous island colonies across the oceans, and many of them uninhabited. This allows for large territories of the open seas to be restricted for navigation and exploration. ठीक है? हम open seas तो कह रहे हैं, but a lot of islands of Indian Ocean, France के islands Indian Ocean में है, उसमें कोई रहता भी नहीं है. Okay, so those islands, this country is owned or colonized before the UNCLOS. So they continue to own that and expand their EEZ. So a lot of issues hai ki that's unfair. Okay, you are continuing with the old colonial mindset and influencing the ownership of the waters by these islands. Okay, so some people, there's some demands about that those islands should be evacuated and the EEZs of those islands should be restricted. Okay, imagine itna bada aapka ocean hai, the huge ocean here, and there are some islands here. Okay, France itna leke baitha hua hai, US itna leke baitha hua hai, Britain has this much, aur yahan pe koi rehta bhi nahi hai. Okay, so what you're doing is open seas hai, but because of these islands, you are controlling the routes here for navigation. This is considered to be unfair advantage, the legacy of the old colonial history. So these islands should get evacuated. Or rakhna bhi hai, to maybe a small area, theek hai, not 200 nautical mile from the baseline of those islands. Ye big issue hai. Theek hai? So UNCLOS ke reforms, what are the changes we would want? The main important is the EEZ wala, where India has serious considerations or serious issues against the uncontrolled navigation rights, khaskar in the Indian Ocean, in the EEZ. Okay? Yes. Okay, we're talking about islands which are not inhabited, small territories हैं. उसका क्या basis होगा वो debate होगा. Okay, but for example, New Zealand has a huge EEZ because of some islands which are scattered in the Pacific. It's an enormous. I mean, you're surprised to know the EEZ of New Zealand is more than that of China. Okay, the EEZ of China is a huge country. Okay, this is one of those disputes. It's almost 3 or 4 times that of China. Okay, so that is the concern. There's unfair distribution of the rights on the waters. Okay, that completes one question. UNCLOS ka provisions and what are the disputes and what are the reforms required for